Hello, and welcome to the HFL Education Business Services podcast. I'm Catherine Loake, the Director of Business Services at HFL Education. We wanted to create this series of mini podcasts because we recognise that the role of school leadership is growing ever wider and ever deeper. And it's becoming increasingly challenging for school leaders to get under the bonnet and unpack some of those key issues away from frontline teaching and learning. So that's where we come in, and I'm joined today by Zoran Dimitrijevic. So Zoran is our Head of Technology in Schools, and both of us work across technology in schools in HFL Education. And I think I commonly see two scenarios in schools. Schools that are benefiting from technology, where it's embedded across the school, it's in the curriculum, it's in the classroom, it's working seamlessly for students and staff behind the scenes. And then we see the schools that are burdened by technology. It's fragmented, it's slow, it's cumbersome. And I think for me, there's two keys to being a beneficiary rather than someone who's burdened by technology. The first is having the right strategy and governance framework in place. And the second is having the right sort of delivery of IT, so the right IT partner. And it strikes me, if you get the first one right, if you get the sort of strategy and your framework right, and the right decisions are being made in the right places, finding the right sort of delivery method becomes a lot easier. Is that what you see as well?
Yes, I mean this is something that has over time, sort of kind of entered every aspect, sort of all of the other vertical markets, irrespective, sort of where you go. All of that is literally sort of just now spilling, sort of and coming into the education and obviously kind of like to the schools. It's difficult for the schools to try and capture all of that skill set and the understanding within the school themselves in order to be able to provide the right direction or the trajectory that schools should take in order to protect themselves or to benefit. With the Department for Education, they have recently come up with standards, and aligning your school to those standards is now a much easier task because there are goals, there are measurables that we have to sort of kind of align ourselves to. Having gone through all of the DFE standards, there is a lot in there. So I do find that it would be difficult for somebody who is not from the IT or the technology sector to go and dissect all of those standards and say what is actually important, what is the priority for my school versus nice to have sort of options, and how can I now filter that all through in order to select the correct IT partner or employ internal IT. The requirements will change in terms of what each school requires, but aligning that to the standards make that job a lot easier.
I was pleasantly surprised when I read the DFE digital standards, because quite often these documents can be quite difficult to digest. But to me, they were really clear and absolutely are where schools need to get to. And the standards state that schools should be working towards them by 2030. And I suppose with my broader business services director hat on, the technologist in me thinks they shouldn't be working towards them by 2030. They absolutely should be meeting them. A key part of education is keeping children safe. And actually keeping them safe in the school environment means we need to be really tight with technology from a kind of safeguarding perspective. But also, schools are vulnerable doubly so because you've got the insider threat in schools from, children who are curious and sort of experimenting in cybercrime sometimes. So we've got these really, really important standards, but also schools are under huge financial strain. And if you haven't kept your investment in technology up, and I completely understand leaders who are deciding, do you know what? That TA for that vulnerable child in that class is more important to me right now than replacing those 30 laptops. I get that decision, but it makes attaining those digital standards so much harder. So how seriously should schools be taking the digital standards? And is it good enough that schools are working towards them by 2030, or should they absolutely be there?
That's a very good question. If I may say, sort of a loaded question. There is a reason why the standards are out there. The standards that DFE has provided are the same standards that businesses have been working on for the last decade. It is the slower introduction for all of those standards into the education was pretty much based on the reality of threat. When we're talking about cyber criminals, the cyber criminals will be going after the bigger enterprises because that is where they can actually get their reward through the ransomware and everything else. And it's also because compiling those cyber attack strategies took time to engineer the phishing attack, which is targeted to a particular person in order to obtain all the credentials relevant in order to extract as much money out of that organization as possible through the ransomware. The revenue potential for the criminals by attacking a school is a lot smaller than attacking, sort of an enterprise organization. However, what we have seen is the proliferation of AI, because it has reduced the amount of time and the research and the effort required to engineer a good spear phishing strategy. Previously, that would take weeks, if not months, to prepare. Now it takes minutes and seconds. Because this has now sort of become really cheap to engineer, they're now going after the mass market. So this is where now the threats that used to be predominantly seen, sort of in that medium-sized businesses, has now dropped to small businesses, to education, to schools. It has enabled cyber criminals to provide this blanket approach to cyber attacks, which increases the risk for schools tremendously. 3 years? It is going to be too late, because the risk is here now.
And I guess this is the challenge, isn't it? Schools are probably the most vulnerable within that group, because we know typically they're spending around half of what commercial businesses are spending. We know that a lot of their systems are out of date, often disjointed, very easy to attack. And so schools are especially vulnerable. And we've both seen, haven't we, firsthand, the impact of cyber attacks on schools. The hardest ones have been special schools, the last place you think anyone with a clear conscience would attack. But the reality is, these are criminals. They don't care that you're, serving children and young people. And the fact of the matter is, you hold lots of very, very sensitive data that in the wrong hands can be very valuable, which is exactly why schools are kind of being targeted.
Because of the budget constraints, the infrastructure is not at the level where it should be. The security and all of the mitigations that should be addressing all of those risks are not in place. There is a constraint. The schools have to decide where that pot of money, how that should be divided. And usually, obviously, sort of teaching and teaching resources will take the priority over IT security. But that is definitely not sort of posing a really, really high risk, especially the aging infrastructure, the aging computers, the approach to plugging those security gaps is hugely, hugely important. But schools will struggle, so they will usually offload that to the IT partner. The risk now doesn't become sort of the school and just the school infrastructure, but it's also who does actually look after that and how.
That brings us seamlessly on, doesn't it? You and I have been heavily invested in a transformation programme of our technology in schools service, because I think we're seeing exactly that schools aren't able to keep pace with commercial businesses in terms of investment in IT. That equipment is becoming older. It's harder to fix when something goes wrong. So we're having to use higher level technicians to fix things. As the technology landscape evolves around us, there is, a broader and broader skill set that technicians need to be able to be competent in to get across a whole school infrastructure. So we'd kind of got to the point where it was really difficult to run a sustainable service. We've talked about this in other podcasts in this series. When that happens, you can't do more with less and you have to change the model. And again, I think that this is where the DfE standards have been really helpful for us, because the IT provider standards, I think, really confirmed our thinking that this is the direction we need to move in. So we've moved away from this model of having the same technician visiting the school on a sort of set time frame, whether that was once a fortnight, once a week. Because what we were finding is that technician increasingly was getting stuck. If you've got vulnerable kit sitting waiting to be fixed, that leaves the school in a real difficult and vulnerable position. So we've now moved, haven't we, to two elements of our service. The first is a piece of the service that's proactive behind the scenes, that is picking up threats and fixing them automatically. And we've also now got a system where unlimited escalation visits. So something goes wrong in a school, the school will ring us, we'll try and fix it remotely initially, because that's the most effective and efficient way of doing it. If that doesn't work, we'll send the right person out, because we recognise we've got this cadre of technologists in HFL, all with a different skill set. And actually someone who knows about a particular type of server, if a school's still using a server, might be very different to someone who's got a knowledge of cloud-based systems. So we're now moved to a system, haven't we, where we're making sure we're deploying the right person. And we've talked a lot in this series of podcasts about increasingly education taking a village, that no one person can know it all, whether that's the school leader or the tech on site. So to what extent, Zoran, is it true that it now takes a village to kind of look after technology?
I think in short, sort of the answer would be yes. Those scheduled visits and engineers, sort of coming to site. There are two aspects to it. One is the efficiency, and the other one is the limited skill set available for the technician. But we have to offset that with, we all like to deal with people. That engineer is there at the school, be there any problems or not. So this is where you have to understand how does that financially impacts school potentially. There is a cost associated with that engineer. And what we are saying is that that engineer obviously needs to be paid irrespective if they're resolving a problem or not. They are actually sitting in the school.
Staff in teaching roles know that Martin the tech is coming on Tuesday between 10 and 12. And if they've got a problem with their laptop, they can take it to Martin. But where we are now sort of being pushed to, I guess, because of the broader threats in technology and the digital standards about sort of ticketing, schools need to call a help desk and then that ticket gets tracked through. If you're a busy classroom teacher and you've got 5 kids with significant additional needs that you're trying to scaffold teaching and learning for, it's really hard to kind of get out of the classroom and sort of register that ticket. But there comes a point, doesn't there, kind of a tipping point. It's a bit like multi-factor authentication as well. We know that can be really cumbersome in a classroom, but there comes a point where the threat becomes greater than the convenience. And I think it feels to me that in education, we're at that tipping point now. And the things that we like that technician that comes in and really can meet the needs of teachers, we're almost tipping past that now. And if we don't change, it's all well and good. And we do want, people to fit around schools as best we can. But the sort of downside of that is that there's this sort of greater risk. We are going to have to think about, well, how do we enable teachers to report their technology issues? And I've seen some great practice in schools where actually the teacher takes it to the office and the office logs the ticket. So I think there are workarounds, aren't there? But I think this sort of resistance to change is dangerous potentially, because actually we're at this tipping point and we are all for supporting schools and supporting staff in classrooms. And we wouldn't be advocating for this new model if we didn't think it was going to keep schools safe and secure, and that was important. But it's a reality that if we don't move this way, we'll be the ones explaining to a school why there is a cyber attack.
Definitely is. And this is one of the reasons, sort of why we had to sort of kind of restructure, and the approach to resolving the issues for the schools. Because the time is an important factor, the benefit of structuring the support to focus on resolving the issues on time, prioritizing, sort of which issues to resolve first, which issues can wait, has become obviously like more important. That's why we kind of switched to the escalation visits. The school doesn't have to wait until next week, Thursday, in order to get the technicians in order to resolve their issue. So this is going into the service desk. They will try to resolve that issue. If that isn't possible and requires a technician on site, the technician is dispatched immediately. So that way the problems are getting resolved much, much faster. But I understand teachers are busy. We don't need to sort of kind of really ponder about that. It's there. They're in the classroom. Something goes wrong. How do they report the tickets? Similar issues existed also in the commercial world, in the private sector. That has changed over time because everybody has suddenly realized that the benefit of resolving the issue, because any issue that hasn't been resolved quickly enough will slow down the teaching process. It will slow down the business process. And that, in terms of the value and the cost and the benefit, all of that put together means, okay, even though we like having somebody come in, sort our problem first, because that is what is holding us back. The escalation visits, and this is one of the reasons why we said it is unlimited, because we don't want the schools to feel there are any limits to how much help they're going to get. So the IT partner needs to be able to provide that at any point in time. The cost of waiting to school kids sitting in the classroom, not being able to learn, teachers not being able to prepare their teaching materials for the following day, all of that feeds to a lot more cost to the school. than the actual sort of cost of the IT support that they have provisioned. In some way, people will communicate that they have got an issue. So when we say teachers don't have smartphones in the classroom, that is one of these aspects that will over time change because of the multi-factor authentication, because that is one of the primary ways of how to prevent the cyber attacks or somebody taking over an account pretending to be you. Because that multi-factor authentication means not only that I need to provide the password to log in onto something, but I need that secondary thing which requires my physical device that the criminal can't have. So it lowers that risk. And the schools will have to manage that requirement with what the risk it carries or what risk it reduces. The benefit in logging that message means that that particular issue has now gone into the whole triage, understanding what the problems are, and being able to compare if there is more of those problems happening to identify the root cause of maybe some of these problems.
So Zoran, we've talked about the challenges that schools face and the need to adapt to a changing technology environment and the risks, and it's a real conundrum for heads. And we said that there are two keys to success: getting the strategy right and getting the right IT partner. What advice would you give to a school leader about how to select the right IT partner?
One is skills. You need to ensure that you're going to ask for an evidence from your IT partner that they are maintaining the skill matrix, so that you can see that there are some improvements and moved forward, so that they can demonstrate, provide you with the evidence that there is a skill matrix, here are the engineers, here are the skills required, and here is where they are on that classification. And that will provide in return the confidence that that IT company has got sufficient skills to be able to support. The second one is being able to classify the issues and the problems. You would be asking for evidence of the platform used. This is the platform that allows you to classify the types of the tickets. The reason why that is important, the types and the subtype of the tickets, it's the granularity of the issues and the classification of those. Because once you can analyze that data, you will know where the root cause of the problem is. So you want from your IT provider to demonstrate and to provide an evidence that they're using a platform that is capable of classifying the issues to the granularity required for that to become the strategy. And by that, you have actually then addressed multiple of these strategic goals put forward by DFE. And then the third one is, how is that communicated to the school? The school wants the evidence of reports. So the school says, I want to have the reports to understand how many tickets have we logged in the whole year of this support contract? How much time did your engineers spend from an IT provider? Basically, that is a feedback where you're going to gauge the value of the contract to the school. You want to understand, based on that reporting, the types and the subtypes of all of those issues, because that provides that important strategic decisions. Because as we mentioned previously, it is always better to invest into the assets and into the infrastructure in the school rather than paying for IT support more in order to support the aging equipment. Those reports need to back those decisions. Then there is also the evidence that you want from these reports about the customer satisfaction. So you want to know that other customers of that IT provider are satisfied with their performance. The understanding these guys are providing good support, their customers are sufficiently happy. So there is less risk there of disappointment. And there is the SLA adherence report. SLA provides the evidence of how quickly their problems can be addressed and how quickly can they be resolved. And obviously, the fourth category is cost. If you select multiple companies, they can tick the boxes, all these 4 boxes that I have just mentioned.
That's the point at which the cost can come in. So rather than a salami
Exactly.
slice, it's getting the quality and then worrying about.
It's the same thing, sort of kind of if you're budgeting to buy a car, there is a difference. You can buy a 15-year-old car, but then understand the cost of that car is going to be very low. For as long as you're happy to accept the risks.
But the maintenance
you
is going to
might
be
stop
huge.
in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
I'm happy to accept certain risks, but the cost is important for me for as long as they have ticked the previous 3 boxes.
Zoran, I think IT is probably the area that is most difficult for heads to get under the bonnet of an unpack, not least because technologists often bamboozle us with tech speak. So thank you for your sort of straight talking and for explaining things so clearly. I think this is going to be really, really valuable for school leaders in thinking about, the importance of those DfE guidelines and or the standards. And I think it was really interesting that you said, yeah, absolutely, schools should be working towards them. The cost is high, but the cost of not doing anything is equally high. So I think there's a real conundrum for heads to sort of ponder there. But I think sort of breaking down this idea of this race to the bottom, this salami slicing with IT provision, and actually getting the strategy right in terms of what you want from your IT provider, and then costs coming into the equation, is a real golden nugget. So thanks for providing that. If you've enjoyed this podcast, there are a whole series available. So please do like and subscribe. If you've got any questions for Zoran or I, please leave them in the chat. Thank you very much.